Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around I'm doing some Frankensteins. A couple of Frankenstein movies which are toward the edge of Frankenstein movies. They're not the ones people think of when the word Frankenstein is mentioned, but they're pretty good. One of them's from this year, 2024, and the other one's from 1990. Both of them have got well-known names attached to them, and both of them are really entertaining. As you can see, the weather's turning now, and I've gone to beanies. The Vegemite beanie has been dragged out of the box, and this video is a day late, and I'm sorry about that. I wasn't feeling up for it yesterday. We had 5 days of a teenager in the house, and so I took a little bit of a breather, but I'm back into it today. There's going to be a video out today. There's going to be a video out tomorrow, so everything will be back on track this week. So let's talk about the most recent of the two films first. A little thing from 2024 called Lisa Frankenstein. It was written by Diablo Cody, who wrote a whole bunch of things, including Jennifer's Body, another comical horror film with female protagonists. And it was directed by the only movie director I know of who was named after a computer game character, Zelda Williams, the daughter of Robin Williams. A lot of people are going to say, no, this isn't my sort of film. But give it a go. If you crossbred Tim Burton when he was good with John Waters, you will get something like Lisa Frankenstein. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would, which when you're watching a movie is always a joyous thing. You go in a movie, you think this is going to be okay, and then it's a little bit better than okay. Your brain lights up. It stars Catherine Newton, who's also in the new vampire movie Abigail. She seems to be on a bit of a run with horror movies at the moment. She plays an unfortunately named young woman called Lisa Swallows. She lives in 1989. Her father was widowed because her mother was killed by an axe murderer, which is a very 1980s thing. And he has remarried another woman called Janet, played by Carla Gugino, who is the wicked stepmother of the piece. The movie's set in Louisiana, so it's got a lot of Spanish moss and old graveyards around. And she found an unconsecrated graveyard from the 19th century. And in that graveyard is a headstone with a bust of a beautiful young man on it. And she kind of has a romantic attachment to this guy. She does charcoal rubbings of gravestones and things like that, a very goth kind of thing to do. And so she attaches herself emotionally to this long-lost guy. Now, we know a lot about the guy before Lisa does, because if you look at the titles of the film, the whole story of this guy's life happens in the titles of the movies at the start, so pay attention when you're watching it. It will be important later. Lisa goes to high school, of course, and has the usual high school problems. There's a sneaky guy in her class that does some untoward things toward her at a party when somebody has dosed her punch with a drug and she gets a little bit out of it. There's another guy in her class that she's attracted to and has a crush on, and she's kind of trying to work her way to finding out more about him and dating him, but she hasn't quite got the riz to do that. She has a few other setbacks. She accidentally gets electrocuted by the suntan bed that her stepmother has in a small shed in the backyard. It malfunctions and zaps her, so she gets zapped by that, and things aren't going very well in Lisa's life. Then there's a big storm that comes through town, and the gravestone that she's been hanging around gets zapped with a lightning bolt. And the guy who was buried there is resurrected. He digs his way out of the grave and turns up at her house covered in mud, looking like a monster, which indeed he is. He's called the Creature, and he's played by Cole Sprouse, who does a really good job of a lot of the physical comedy in this film. He goes to Lisa's house. She finally figures out who he is, puts him in the shower, starts trying to dress him reasonably. The clothes he's wearing aren't appropriate, and they're also 100 years old and have been under the ground for 100 years. So she decides to keep him around, because what else is she going to do with a zombie? Problem is, the zombie is missing some parts. He doesn't have an ear, and he's quite sad about that. And she can't let him cry, because when he cries, his tears stink like the worst smell you can imagine, like Donald Trump in a court case. It's really a rank smell, so she's got to keep him happy, partly because she's a nice person and she likes him, and also partly because if he cries, it's like chemical warfare. So Lisa helps him out with that kind of stuff. He's missing an ear, he's missing an arm, and he's missing other parts of his body, which this plot will tell us about later on. And so she goes on this mission to find him body parts, and unfortunately the Creature kills a few people, and the body parts are acquired through those deaths. And fortunately too, Lisa works for a clothing alteration company as a part-time job. So she's very good at sewing things. So she sews various parts onto this creature and then has them bond to his body by putting him into the malfunctioning electrocuting tanning bed they have in their backyard. This escalates and gets a lot worse. Meanwhile, the relationship between her and this resurrected 19th century guy slowly gets stronger and stronger, and it turns into quite a lovely little romance, which surprised the hell out of me, how sweet it is, and how these two misfits fit together really nicely. This movie wears its influences on its sleeve. There's a scene where some of the characters are watching TV, and the movie they're watching is Chud 2 Bud the Chud. A lot of the posters Lisa has on a wall are horror movie posters. She's very much into horror movies, and so it's not too daunting for her to suddenly have a 19th century zombie living in her closet. The movie also has a great look. It's got a very pastel 1990s look. There's a lot of contemporary music used in the movie. Some of it used to great comic effect as well. The silliness of the movie just absolutely works. It really lands its premise nicely. It's not the best zombie movie. It's not the best Frankenstein movie in the world. And the reason I'm doing this on Science Fiction Saturday is, of course, that Frankenstein is one of the first great science fiction novels. But it works. Catherine Newton is great as Lisa. Cole Sprouse is great as the creature. Lisa Soberano is good as Taffy, her stepsister, and she has some interesting character beats as well. And Carla Gugino playing the stepmother, Janet, is wonderfully monstrous, and she gets to do some comedic stuff, and she's a definite threat to Lisa. She threatens to have Lisa put in an asylum at one stage, which terrifies her because she goes through a lot of stuff in her life and doesn't need her stepmother misinterpreting everything she does for her own evil needs. She's a narcissist, she's nasty, she listens to the worst possible motivational tapes on a Walkman that you could ever imagine. And Carla Gugino lands the role really well, making her evil stepmother something quite memorable. Again, this is one of those movies that I'm not the target audience for. The target audience for this movie is probably women who like horror movies. But I liked it. I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was great. There is some very forthright dialogue in the film, and I'll put a bit of it here.
Look, I gotta go change my pad, and you gotta get upstairs for the night, because they're gonna be home soon.
Which I'm on board for. I like the fact that they put that dialogue in there. This movie is a reminder that not all horror movies have to be for guys. Not all of them are for monster kids. Not all of them are for people my age or younger guys who have every single movie Rob Zombie ever made in their collection. This is a great horror movie which says some things about toxic males and also allows the movie to have the space for quite a sweet romance in it. So you might want to check out Lisa Frankenstein. I know it is on Shudder in some markets. It's getting physical media releases. It's shown in cinemas here as well. And it is kind of newer version of the kinds of films Tim Burton used to make, with a little bit of that soupçon of John Waters' grossness about it, which I'm there for. By the way, John Waters is making another film, and I want to see that one as well. I like his stuff. I like the transgressiveness of it. I like the nonconformity of it. And Lisa Frankenstein definitely has a bit of that in its DNA. Check it out. You might enjoy it much more than you think you're going to. The second Frankenstein movie I've got for you relates to a birthday present I just received from one of the subscribers. Evil Pixie 69 sent me something from Morecambe up in the north of England. I'll show you the card first. I'm going to talk about the movie, but please bear with me on this. There's the card I got. Good bit of English humour there. And I got a book. Always up for a book. Pocket Essentials film, Roger Corman, with a whole bunch of précis and information about the oeuvre, and that's not focusing, or the oeuvre of Roger Corman. And that relates to the movie, because the movie I've got for you is his last directed movie. He hadn't directed in 20 years, and he went back in 1990 to direct Frankenstein Unbound, based on the novel by Brian Aldiss. In some markets, the movie is known as Roger Corman's Frankenstein, which is a bit of an ego thing, but we'll let that pass. And it's got a killer cast in it. The story is, it starts in 2031. A scientist called Joe Buchanan, played by John Hurt, has developed an implosion ray. You shoot something, it implodes, disappears, perfect weapon. He's working out of a lab in California. Everybody's happy with this, except for the fact that there's a side effect to the ray. The implosion that occurs doesn't destroy the objects, it moves them through time. And it's causing time rifts as a side effect of using this weapon. Big, long, ugly clouds start appearing over the places where the weapon's used. Buchanan's a bit worried about this. He drives home in his AI car, which is a very groovy looking car. And in his front yard, there are a bunch of local neighbourhood kids burying a bicycle for weird reasons. And Joe stops and talks to them. And then above him, one of the clouds opens up and causes a time rift, which moves him back to early 19th century Switzerland on the shores of Lake Geneva. And he is on the same part of the shores of Lake Geneva at the same time that Lord Byron, Percy Shelley and Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley were hanging out in the Villa Diodati, and Mary was writing a novel of Frankenstein. So Joe and his AI car have moved back in time. He parks the car in a little cow shed up in one of the pastures above the lake and goes down into town, swaps a gold ring he has for the right clothing and some food and things, and coincidentally in a tavern meets Victor Frankenstein, played by Raoul Julia.
Tell me, is your attire the result of Napoleon's defeat, or have you been abandoned by a circus?
Who is a great Frankenstein. He nails the role. His Frankenstein is bombastic, atheistic, prideful, focused on his work. He may be one of the great Frankensteins. Being a scientist, he and Joe strike up an acquaintance. He sees Joe's watch, which is a modern digital watch, and he's fascinated by it, and so they're talking with each other. But what Joe doesn't know is that Frankenstein's already created his monster, a great hulking brute of a thing, played by Nick Brimble. The makeup for Frankenstein's monster in this is really good, totally unlike the Karloff Frankenstein, but really effective. And there are also other things about his monster. The monster has a second thumb on that part of its hand, and enormous hands. So it's got even better opposable thumbs than we have. It's got big round metal plates sticking out of the side of its head and enormous neck muscles to hold up this enormous head. It really is something special, and it's enormously strong. It will rip the arm off a human being and beat you to death with it. Very well thought out Frankenstein monster. Buchanan also meets Mary Wollstonecraft. She isn't married to Shelley yet, and he's enchanted with her. He gets his car to print out a copy of her novel before she's finished writing it, and they too strike up an acquaintanceship. Mary Wollstonecraft was known to be a proponent of free love, and so her and Joe have an assignation. She's played by Bridget Fonda and does a pretty good job of it. The other weird casting in this is we've got Jason Patrick playing Lord Byron and the Australian pop star Michael Hutchence playing Percy Shelley. Now, Michael Hutchence was not a good actor. I didn't particularly like his music either, and he died at an early age in the 1990s of what one of his exes said was autoerotic asphyxiation. Other people have said it's a suicide, other people have said it's an accidental death due to a cocktail of various drugs he was taking. But Hutchence isn't around anymore, but he doesn't make much of an impression as Percy Shelley, though Jason Patrick is kind of okay as Lord Byron, and Bridget Fonda is quite charming as Mary. So Buchanan gets involved in Frankenstein's business. Frankenstein's creature is killing people around the villages. He convinces Frankenstein that he must create a mate. Frankenstein's fiancée Elizabeth is around and unfortunately meets with an accident and becomes the second creation of Raoul Julia's Frankenstein. Buchanan is trying to stop Frankenstein because he's killing people and doing all sorts of monstrous things. And using his car, he transports Frankenstein's lab, the monster, the resurrected Elizabeth, Frankenstein, and himself into a distant future year where the world is covered in ice and there are a number of surviving buildings and laboratories, including one where he is known to the AI running the lab. And we get a climax to the film that way. This is an interesting film. It takes a good approach, which is combining Frankenstein with the creator of Frankenstein and that wonderful summer they spent at the Villa Diodati, where John Polidori wrote his vampire story, and Byron and Shelley and Mary were in something of a menage a trois with the mythical Frankenstein and his monster. And you throw in the modern science fiction aspect of a time traveler jumping back to meet them. John Hurt's pretty good as Buchanan. Raoul Julia is great. Nick Brimble, Bridget Fonda. I don't think that Coleman's direction is fantastic. He hadn't directed in 20 years since he did Richtofen and Brown in 1971. He was a good director, but he wasn't a great director ever. There's a look to this one that works. I mean, it is of its 1990s times. The computer graphics used are wireframe computer graphics. The operating system on the AI car is very much like an Amiga 500. It has a very period charm about it to a modern audience and nostalgia as well for those of us who had Amiga 500s. I enjoyed rewatching it. The locations, which were mainly filmed around Milan and Bellagio in Italy. I like the AI car. I like John Hurt, even though he's not necessarily acting his A game in this one. But Raoul Julia, making his Frankenstein large and theatrical and keenly intelligent, prideful and boastful, really lands that role and is a good match for Nick Brimble's creature, who is naive and angry and damaged and hurt. Both of those two roles are really played and written well. So I'd suggest you check out Frankenstein Unbound. I think it's a nice one to revisit if you've seen it in the past. Or if you haven't seen it at all, you should check it out. It's an honest Frankenstein movie of its time. Didn't make any money at the time, but I think it's one of those movies that would really benefit from, say, a 4K release with a lot of extras contextualizing it. There's a lot to say about that film, and I think it's definitely one of those ones that needs to get a bit of a boost and needs to get a little more recognition in the current era. So that's it for this time around. Thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, do all that jazz. You can also support the channel by donating at patreon.com/cherrytalksmovies or by becoming a channel member. Got an interesting pair of action films for you next time around, which very few people know about. They're from 2008, 2011. But I enjoyed both of them a lot, and I think that you might want to check them out. Until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Find some obscure and half-forgotten Frankenstein movies, or even a modern interpretation of Frankenstein, which has a lot of fun to it. And I'll catch you next time.